You don't remember your first day of school, but your body does. The sound of the bell, the instinct to go quiet, the automatic gesture of lining up, raising your hand, asking for permission to use the bathroom. And all of it seemed normal. It felt right. No one questioned it, because everyone had already been conditioned. You were led to believe that school was your doorway to freedom. But what truly began there was something else. A silent process, subtle, irreversible. A deep training that didn't cultivate thinkers, it shaped behaviors. It wasn't just about learning math, history, or grammar. It was about learning where to stand, when to speak, how to please, and above all, how not to disturb. The system didn't fail you, it worked perfectly, because from the beginning, its goal was never your autonomy, it was your compliance. Look at the signs. Standardized classrooms, standardized tests, standardized schedules, all designed to erase your uniqueness and shape you into something predictable, quiet, usable. And this isn't some vague theory, it's a documented pattern. A social engineering model inherited from the Industrial Revolution, where each student was treated like a component, not a thinking being. You grew up believing rebellion was wrong. That creativity was a distraction, that silence was virtue, and when something felt off, they labeled you a problem student. When you asked too many questions, they said you weren't focused. When you had your own ideas, they said you needed discipline. But what if you were right all along? What if that restlessness you felt wasn't a flaw, but a form of awareness trying to survive? This isn't just a story about school. It's the story of how you were trained to doubt yourself, of how, since childhood, you were taught to ask for permission to exist. It's not an exaggeration. It's just a truth too uncomfortable to fit on a banner. And now, decades later, you still carry it. In your job, in your relationships, in the way you wait for orders without realizing it, in the way you fear being wrong, in the way you avoid conflict even when you're being suffocated. You were programmed to fit a mold that was never made for you. This video won't teach you how to think, because thinking, you always knew how. You just needed to remember. Now let's go back to the beginning of the process, to the first silent mechanism that shaped everything without you noticing. They told us school was the path to freedom, that within notebooks and exams, we would begin to shape our future. But no one ever explained that the model which shaped us wasn't born to set us free. It was born to domesticate. The modern educational system was engineered in the heart of the Industrial Revolution, not by philosophers, but by designers of efficiency. Men who looked at children as resources and at education as a conveyor belt. Every class was designed to resemble a factory shift, every bell a production alarm, every test a conformity inspection. Thinking differently was noise, questioning the lesson was a defect in the machine. And so we were trained not to understand the world, but to accept the one they handed us. The promise was freedom, but what we received was conditioning. The freedom they spoke of was always in the future, always just ahead. First, you had to pass the year, then pass the exams, then enter the market. And when we finally looked up, we were already deep inside the system, obedient, without remembering how it began. This structure didn't arise by accident. It was planned, modeled after textile factories, military organizations, silent prisons. The purpose of school was to produce docile workers, predictable minds, bodies that rise at the sound of a bell, and hearts that stopped asking why. The word educate comes from the Latin educere, to lead out. But what they did was the opposite. They put us inside a box, sealed it with tests, subjects, unquestionable rules, and threw away the key. Those who adapted were rewarded with grades, recognition, approval. Those who didn't were silenced, shamed, reduced to statistics of dropout rates, school failure, learning disorders. But what if the failure was never yours? What if the real failure was a system that never intended for you to be free? You didn't fail because you couldn't adapt. You resisted. Maybe in silence, maybe crying behind closed doors, maybe wondering why everything felt wrong in a place they said was your gateway to the future. Now maybe you understand. That discomfort was a signal, and the signal was clear. This wasn't freedom, it was control, containment, the most convincing lie of your childhood. And the cruelest part, it came wrapped as a gift, as a right, as a privilege, but a freedom that teaches obedience before thought was never freedom. It was only the beginning of your conditioning. You didn't learn how to think, you learned how to react, to wait for the bell, to await instruction, to associate grades with worth, exams with merit, punishment with failure, and all of it felt normal, it felt educational, but what was really happening was something else, something deeper, a kind of conditioning, an invisible script where every gesture, every routine, every memorized answer shaped your behavior without you even realizing. This is called conditioned response, and although few are aware, the educational system borrowed directly from it. In the 19th century, Ivan Pavlov proved he could train a dog to salivate at the sound of a bell, if that bell was always followed by food. The dog didn't think, it responded, and school followed the same logic. The bell signaled the end of class. The grade told you whether you had value. The test didn't assess your thinking, it measured your ability to replicate. The punishment didn't correct mistakes, it suppressed disobedience. And so, generation after generation, we were conditioned to seek external approval, to fear being wrong, to equate silence with virtue, repetition with safety, obedience with worth. This obedience manual was never printed, but it was executed with surgical precision. The teacher wasn't the villain. Often they were prisoners of the same system, rewarded for maintaining order, controlling the room, following the curriculum. And the curriculum, that was written by hands that never stood in front of a class, but knew exactly what they wanted. Predictability. There is no space for critical thinking where time is regimented, where truth comes printed in textbooks, where there's only one right answer. Critical thinking requires silence, uncertainty, and chaos, and that threatens control. Thinking was never the goal. The goal was conditioning. And the most insidious part is that it doesn't end when we leave school. The reflex lives on. At work, where you wait for approval. In relationships, where you fear being wrong. In adulthood, where you only feel safe when someone tells you you're doing it right. That fear wasn't born in you. It was taught, cultivated, rewarded. You didn't fail because you hesitated. You were trained to hesitate, to doubt yourself, to wait for the signal, even when the signal never comes. Now maybe you're starting to notice the obedience manual was never about education. It was about control, about shaping your mind to fit a mold, about teaching you to search for food every time the bell rang, even when there was no food, even when there was no reason. And maybe, just maybe, you're starting to hear that bell ringing in places you never thought it could exist. Few remember the feeling, but it's imprinted. The line, always the line, the sound of the bell, the alignment, the silence, you standing still, among other small bodies waiting for something, even without knowing what. It seemed like just another routine, but no routine is neutral, especially in a system built to teach obedience before awareness. The line appeared to be just logistics, but it was much more. It was symbolic choreography of hierarchy, a daily ritual of submission and containment. Each straight step, each order to stay quiet, each correction for stepping out of place, shaped something deeper than the body. It shaped the mind. In the line, you don't think, you wait. You don't question, you accept. The body learns that it must occupy its assigned place, and that place is given, not chosen. You learn that time isn't yours, that you move only when instructed, that every action depends on permission, And this lesson enters through the skin, through the muscles, through the eyes that look forward, but see no exit. What if the line was more than a way to organize children? What if it was the first rehearsal for a lifetime of waiting? Waiting for the right opportunity, the perfect moment, the permission to live. Waiting for someone to say that now you may speak, act, exist. This kind of waiting doesn't appear by chance. It's taught. And it begins there, when you were 6 years old and already knew you weren't allowed to step out of line. There's a dark wisdom in these small gestures. Those who built this system knew that the most efficient control isn't the one that holds you tightly. It's the one that teaches your body to hold itself. The line was a daily reminder, you are not in charge. Someone above you is, and your role is to wait. And the most unsettling part, how many times, even as an adult, do you still stand in line? Not literally, emotionally, waiting for validation, for approval, for recognition that may never come, because they taught you that only after everyone else has passed. It might be your turn, but maybe it never will be, because those who wait forever live forever in waiting. And that was the point all along. It was never about organizing children, it was about initiating a logic, an invisible code of containment, a pedagogy of postponement, where the world isn't shaped by those who think, but by those who obey, quietly, at the end of the line. Maybe you remember, or maybe you've buried it, that feeling of being out of sync, of seeing things differently, of questioning what seemed obvious to everyone else, of not being able to fit in. And then came the label. Problem student, undisciplined, distracted. But no one asked what was behind that unrest. No one wanted to hear what you saw, because the system didn't need those who see, it needed those who obey. Thinking outside the pattern was never celebrated, it was diagnosed. Divergence became disorder, curiosity became distraction, creativity became deviation. The system had to preserve the straight line, the predictable track, and those who tried to escape that path were brought back with failing grades, reprimands, progress reports sent home. School claimed to want to form citizens, but it treated the questioners like threats. Those who spoke too much were silenced. Those who asked too many questions were isolated. Those who felt too deeply were labeled, and little by little, authentic thought was extinguished, not because of lack of capacity, but because of too much control. It was never about teaching, it was about conforming, about suppressing the impulse to see beyond. And when that didn't work, the system used other tools, referrals to psychologists, diagnoses of attention deficits, suggestions to transfer schools, all to ensure the problem wasn't the model, it was you. But it wasn't, because maybe what they called distraction was just a mind still alive. Maybe what they called defiance was simply courage. Maybe what they called inadequacy was your refusal to accept a logic that never made sense. And the most brutal part is that many gave up. Tired of fighting, they internalized the label, began to believe something was wrong with them. Decades later, those inner voices remain, whispering, you talk too much, you think the wrong way, you can't focus. But those voices didn't start with you. They were planted, nurtured, repeated through years of conditioning that rewarded only one kind of mind, the docile, the linear, the tamed. School never knew what to do with the wild mind. So it killed it and called it discipline. But maybe deep inside, that mind is still alive, hidden, waiting for the moment it will be heard again, not as a disorder, but as truth. Your truth, the one they tried to silence, but never fully erased. You grew up, changed environments, changed clothes, changed addresses, but inside, something hasn't changed. There's still hesitation, still fear of making mistakes. Still that quiet voice asking whether you're allowed to be who you are. You think it's insecurity, but the real name is conditioning, a script implanted so early, so deeply, that now it feels like second nature. You think you need permission to try something new, to leave a relationship that suffocates you, to switch careers, to say no, to say yes. That reflex didn't come out of nowhere. It was shaped by years of obedience training, and now it shows up in the most intimate places of your life, in the choices you delay, in the truths you swallow, in the dreams you quietly set aside. How many times have you felt the need to justify your existence, to explain your decision, to present a reason just to be who you are? That's not personal weakness. That's the echo of a system that taught you to adapt first and think later. That molded your body for discipline, your voice for caution, your mind for fear. The scars are everywhere. In the meeting where you have an idea but stay silent. In the love you want to live but don't allow. In the talent you carry but believe isn't enough. And they're in the mirror too, where sometimes you see an adult but feel like a child still waiting for approval. That waiting paralyzes you because they taught you to move only when it's safe. But real life has no green light. It asks for courage with no guarantee. And that kind of courage isn't taught in schools built on tests, rankings, and silent obedience. It's learned in the chaos, in pain, in the rediscovery of what they tried to bury. You are not broken, you are conditioned. And conditioning, unlike visible trauma, is insidious. It doesn't shout, it whispers. Stay quiet. Don't stand out. Do it right. Be accepted. And you obey. Because you obeyed for so long, you mistook it for choice. But now, maybe you're beginning to see that the fear holding you back isn't yours. That the doubt that stops you wasn't born with you. That this voice saying now is not the time is just an echo of those same walls, of those same desks, of that same bell, still ringing even after all these years. And maybe it's time to shut it off for good. What if everything you believed about school was wrong? Not a mistake of execution, a mistake of design. And what if the project was never to teach you how to think, but to teach you how to comply? What if, from the very beginning, the educational system was built as a tool for social containment, not for human development? This idea isn't extreme, it's simply an unfiltered look at a structure that has always prioritized standardization. The architecture of schools, the uniform curriculums, the multiple choice tests, the logic of grade levels and automatic advancement, everything points to mass engineering. Not of individuals, but of behaviors, of predictable reactions, of bodies trained to occupy pre-assigned roles. The content was never the core, the content was the vehicle. The true center of the system was the format. Repetition, order, punishment disguised as evaluation, reward disguised as merit. School didn't shape minds, it shaped patterns. And it did so with the precision of a machine that cannot stop, because its true product isn't diplomas. It's obedient citizens. Each phase reinforced the message that the world is something to be accepted, not transformed. That authority must not be questioned, that rules matter more than justice, that thinking differently is dangerous. The result is in front of us. Generations who can memorize but not decide, who repeat slogans but don't recognize manipulation, who confuse validation with truth. And the cruelest part is that this engineering no longer needs surveillance. It's internalized. The adult already carries the monitor within, already corrects themselves before being corrected, already censors themselves before being censored. And so, the system maintains order without fences, because now the fences are in the mind. Once you understand this, everything shifts. That childhood discomfort, the feeling of not belonging, the constant fear of making mistakes, it all makes sense. Not as personal flaws, but as consequences of a much larger project. One that disguised containment as education, that sold domestication as freedom, that called the cage a classroom, The truth hurts because it shows that what happened wasn't just negligence, it was intentional, it was designed. And the hardest part, it's still operating, updated, more subtle, more digital, but still functioning. You weren't the problem, you were the exception, and maybe still are. Because while many continue to follow the script, waiting for the next command, some have begun to see behind the curtain. And to see is the beginning of liberation, but only the beginning. Because breaking this cycle isn't easy. It's lonely, it's painful, but it's real. And maybe it's the only way to become, at last, what school never wanted you to be. Someone who is truly free. Now that you've seen it, there's no way to unsee it. The signs were always there, the rituals, the commands, the small violences disguised as education. You weren't educated, you were domesticated. The difference may sound subtle, but the experience is devastating. And maybe the cruelest part is this: for so long you believed the problem was you, that it was laziness, lack of focus, lack of discipline. But what happened to you was too much restraint. A pedagogy of silencing, where anything that strayed from the pattern was treated as danger, where the light in your eyes was mistaken for defiance, where your desire to know was smothered by the obligation to repeat. You didn't fail. You survived. You survived a system that taught you to distrust your own intuition, that taught you to fear your freedom, that trained you to question your instincts, and most of all, to doubt your own mind. And now that you know this, maybe you've started to see the aftershocks everywhere, in how you shrink, how you hesitate, how you wait, how you ask for permission just to want. These are the remnants of a system that never intended to develop human beings. It intended to shape cogs, machines that function well, but suffer quietly. But there is something the system could not erase, something that endured, a spark, a discomfort that never fully disappeared. And now maybe that discomfort has a name and a meaning. That pain is not failure, it's memory. It's your body telling you that something was never right, that something still isn't right. And maybe there's still time to change it. There's no return to childhood, but there is choice in the present. The choice to see, to question, to break away, even if it hurts, even if it costs you. Because the freedom you've been searching for out there might have always started in here. At the exact point where the lie began, the wound is open, and that is a good sign. A sign that finally you've started to feel what they tried to numb. The truth, yours, inalienable, inconvenient, indestructible. And now that you've touched it, the choice is yours to keep living the way they taught you, or to begin living the way you were meant to be. You were never the mistake. You were the target, and now you are the exception. The wound is open, and that is the beginning of healing.